What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Mr. Gloat podcast. Today, we're coming back to my old quality film as we are reuniting with my phone once again. It's time to save up battery power because I have to charge out this phone, but that's not going to stop me from recording another episode and find my cable wire so I can start plugging stuff in, because this time we are coming to you viewers live from a place called Port, but you can't land. You can't. If you want to figure where that's from, you better let me know, because I'm not going to spoil it for you guys. Because at the end of the day, guys, we have surprising reports going on recently for what's been happening in the world of boxing. Now, before we get to it, guys, I did promise to myself to stop talking about the FIFA World Cup, but in all honesty, we're coming close to it, so I might as well talk about it now. And when I talk about it, I was pissed of what just happened. Because for some reason, Spain, out of nowhere, defeated France 2-0 today. Yeah, France was the undefeated team, including Argentina, and it was horrible. I would like to say that England defeating Mexico in the round of 16 9 days ago was, 9 days ago. Was it July 5th? Yeah, 9 days ago as I'm recording this. Even though England defeated Mexico 3-2, and I thought that was the worst ever game ever to see a North American team have 3 games in their group undefeated, they lose. But this one was the worst. The country of France didn't even score a single goal in the semifinals. Argentina, France, and Mexico were in the tournament bracket with a 3-0 record. I thought Mexico was the worst for England of how England defeated them, and England are performing against Argentina tomorrow. But this one, I don't get it. I don't understand. France got so many lucky victories dominating Sweden. They defeated Paraguay, which they thought they were going to take on Germany. They defeated Morocco when Morocco had 0 offensive. And then they defeat, again, Spain, come out of nowhere to, this has to be one of the dumbest, biggest, horrible upsets in history. And guys, I did say this in my last episode, or my second last episode. Yes, it was my second last episode last Saturday, that I did say, as I'm recording this episode, just to let you viewers know, all of the episodes, as I'm recording this, we're doing the full episode of the Road to the Atomweight Championship of Women's Boxing, which is part 2, 3, 4, and 5 of Friday. So I'm uploading these videos way past when the FIFA World Cup is done. So keep that in mind. So you might hear my updates come out a week or even days after the FIFA World Cup is over. So just bear with me on that. But again, I don't get it. Lionel Messi from Argentina has 8 goals. Kylian Mbappe from France has 8 goals. Those 2 guys utterly crushed competition last year, even though they had problems scoring draws and barely making it to the finals, depending on the competition or performing in the end. And now this happens. France and Argentina would have been a great battle for them in the finals, and this is what happens. And 2 of the last episodes I said last Saturday ago, as the video was recorded, it's already going to be the 3rd place finals against France versus England, I guess, because maybe Argentina might defeat England. But there's people out there that are also chanting for England because of their unbelievable victories they've had over the last week. So they believe England might defeat Argentina, and that would be a shocker as well. Sheesh, how? I don't know how and why they would lose. But again, I did say this, that if France and Argentina don't make it to the finals or fight in the finals, this whole FIFA World Cup 2026 is going to be an F tier. Guess what? at this moment, there's no point of talking about nothing. All I can say is this is abysmal. It's embarrassing, and I hate every bit of it when you go forward. It's ridiculous. I just can't understand why and how we got into this, but man, it's so horrible. Like, I just don't understand why these moments in the history of football had to come to this, and because it just upsets me that this is how it ends. Like, this is just not what I wanted to see, and that just upsets me the most. It's not funny. It's not. And I wish I was joking about all this bullcrap, but this has to be the worst ever. Now, just to let you guys know, I'm not going to talk about this very much because this entire episode I'm going to talk about is the 25th anniversary of a tournament that became one of the surprising moments in 2001. But I just want to get to this whole FIFA World Cup thing because I don't understand why it has to end like this. Like, I know France are playing for the bronze medalist in the 18th of Saturday. Again, like, what, and don't get me wrong, even though Argentina still has an undefeated record, they're the only team that are undefeated in the World Cup as we speak, because just to let people know, like, even though with England and Spain being involved, the thing is, England have 2 wins and a draw, and that draw was from Ghana. And the game with Spain only won 2 games. They drawed against Cape Verde, but dominate the others. So technically, both England and Spain have a single draw, not a clean undefeated record. So I'm not going to count those 2. I'm also going to create a video on YouTube for undefeated records of what happened to each FIFA player in the FIFA World Cup team that had a 3-0 record in every single year from 1930 to 2026 and talk about it, which is going to be similar than how YouTube channel KTO made a video of how NFL players started with an 11-0 record or an 0-5 record for football teams, and we're going to talk about that and how that became crazy in football. But you get the point. It's going to be an interesting formality and try to understand what we're going to talk about. Just each team with an undefeated record and how far they went. Talk about the ones that had an undefeated record and made it to the finals, or some that haven't. And we're not going to talk about players that had draws or wins. Well, wins, but no draws and no defeats. Just the players with draws, and know if those undefeated records were legit. And I'm going to try to make a video of the FIFA World Cup, part 1, because there's more than a dozen FIFA World Cups in the history when it comes to it, because the FIFA World Cup has been around since 1930. 1930 is much. They started a few of them in the 1930s, came back in 1950 to be big enough. Seriously, they have like 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 20, 22, 23. 23 FIFA World Cups have happened. So I'm only going to do like 8, 16, 24. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about 8 events in each episode, make a video similar to KTO, not like a podcast, and try to cover things up by it. And I'm only going to start off a little bit different, just like the YouTube channel, the YouTuber, forgot his name, the guy that did the fighters with undefeated records in boxing. Like, what's that YouTube channel's name again? Undefeated Boxers. What's that YouTuber's name again? Give me a second. I want to know that YouTuber's name. Undefeated Records. Okay, where are you? Undefeated Records. EV Boxing. EV Boxing. Just to let you guys know. He's the YouTuber that did the video, which undefeated boxers are most likely to lose in tier lists. And his most popular videos on YouTube is the video Best of Prime Deontay Wilder, which is his most popular video, and his first video to hit 1 million views when he uploaded that in this year, just a few months ago in 2026. So congrats on that. What about his videos on YouTube Shorts? Yeah, he has Deontay Wilder best KOs, and that video has 13 million views on YouTube Shorts. Wow, he has Deontay Wilder's on the cusp for EV boxing. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting project I'm going to talk about. I'll even talk about the female FIFA World Cup, and I might even talk about the Olympic Games World Cup for football as well, of soccer, maybe in the future, and talk about it. Because yes, I hate soccer. It's my least favorite sport, but you know what? I might as well just say the heck with it. Yes, I'm upset that Spain defeated France, but you know what? I'm going to try to do something interesting and see what we can do. Anyway, that's all I'm going to have to say right now. But for now, we're just going to wait until that moment comes. So, the real reports for competition, ladies and gentlemen, are as follows. Oh yeah, I forgot to mute out my computer here. I keep forgetting. So, let's look at our phone here and try to get some information of updates on the world of professional sports here. Technically, we do not have a lot of interesting stuff going on in the news yet. Only for understanding, one person in boxing still gets me a little bit deterred, somewhat disturbed. And that boxer's name, out of nowhere, from Boxing News Online, states here, 10 hours ago, from Boxing News Online, states, quote, world champion says he is going to retire Gervonta Tank Davis, which will be his last fight in the sport. So here's the thing. Gervonta Tank Davis has been called out for best versus the best, encountered which could end up being his final fight in his career. Davis has not fought since his controversial draw back against Lamont Roach in March, with not to emerge victorious, but still retained his WBA title, until when Tank then entertained talks for an immediate rematch for his WBA title defense, only instead of having a scheduled exhibition bout against Jake Paul, and that failed later that year, giving Jake Paul to fight against Anthony Joshua. So thank you, Gervonta Tank Davis, for ending YouTubers in the boxing world. Smart. But yeah, other information does states here, believing that since then he had remained out of the ring for now, ever since November, when he was facing domestic violence. In January, he was finally getting to accused and such. And albeit after rejecting an opportunity to reclaim his WBA lightweight title against Floyd Schofield, Davis, however, is appeared the world title are neither here nor there, even as at the 135-pound weight class as we speak. As recently this month, he has been granted as part of the championship of recess. And they've also pointed out here states possibility the same, it seems, could be said for Shakur Stevenson, who also holds on to the WBO super lightweight belt strap, who is not overly bothered about becoming an undisputed king, so that could be interesting enough. With all talks here about Dana White and from his Zuffa Boxing, and believing they've been told by the 29-year-old guy named Chris Mannix that he sees his legacy being defined in the fights themselves rather than the belts on the line. So we could see there's opportunities here that we could actually see some new ideas. We've had talks with Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao in the rematch, and again, all information on BoxRec has disappeared. Nothing could be said. Derek Chisora sums up Joe Joyce's performance in the latest fight against Artem Saslenkov amid calls to retire. And I already talked about the episode yesterday ago, with Murat Gassiev defeating Peter Kadiru for his WBA heavyweight championship belt. great fight for what it was. The entire show itself was hard to find information. So before we talk about the information for 2001, we better talk about what happened after the entirety of the show. So, still looking up BoxRec as we speak. Okay, so Murat Gassiev, he's ranked number 4 in BoxRec because of that victory. He's a champion after all, so what you gonna do? But unfortunately, the information on BoxRec still has no information of other fighters. We do have a debut fighter and a 3-0 fighter from Russia that won an 8-round fight by super welterweight division in an IBA pro fight. But again, we still don't got these other updates on these other professional boxing fights with Murad Khalidov and Muslim Gadzhimagomedov, and also Kevin Ramirez, Artem Yelov. Some interesting fighters in the division of Russia, but again, none of the information is here, but there are videos on YouTube of the fights. So for reasons why BoxRec has not released any of these fights except the last 2 fights of Joe Joyce and Murat Gassiev, again, I can't understand that to be certain with. All in all, it's going to be interesting for what it is as time goes on. But we're just going to have to wait for that moment to come. If it does. All right, so today, guys, we are going to go back into the past. So in 2004, we talked about Bernard Hopkins and his victories in 2004 from the Oscar De La Hoya fights and how their whole 4-belt undisputed became the first time in history. Let's go back 3 years before all of that changed. So let's talk about the history, guys. We are going back to April the 14th, 2001, live in Madison Square Garden. And we'll talk about the Madison Square Garden of MSG on May the 12th, 2001, about a month later, which will be another fight in the tournament, which will be the Undisputed Middleweight Championship tournament of 2001, which might have been one of the greatest tournaments ever. It's almost like something that I could really enjoy talking about. And this tournament is pretty damn good in my opinion. So with all that being said, it's going to bring in some interesting moments and stuff in the spotlight. Before we talk about it, guys, we have to talk about what has been going on in 2001. 2001 is crazy. So on April the 9th, about a few days, a week before the show started, Wrestling Observer Rewinder had already posted up updates of WrestleMania 17 in the books, where Dave Meltzer calls it the culmination of wrestling boom. Much like WrestleMania 3 at the peak of the 80s boom, Dave Meltzer predicts that this was the peak of the era, and the business that the standpoint for WrestleMania 17 is likely the biggest revenue-generating wrestling event of all time, with the second largest paying crowd in history, only behind WrestleMania 3, which was $3.5 million gate, the largest in North America, and doubled into the previews from the record of New Japan Wrestling, which has been done in the gates a few times in career-wise decisions. But mostly, with all that being said, it did a good job for what it was. And the big story at the time is when Stone Cold Steve Austin defeated The Rock to become another WWE champion at the time, he would actually turn heel when he aligned with Vince McMahon in plans of the works, when him and Vince McMahon shook his hand during the end of the show. This was also around the time, weeks after, when WCW was around March, about 3 weeks ago, where Vince McMahon bought WCW. And fortunately, Shane McMahon went to his back during the final Monday Nitro show, and that was it. They also reported out that ECW was also on the cutting board ever since when ECW ran their last show in January, but they were still trying to get back in pays during April, but nothing came of it. Unfortunately, when time was done, Paul Heyman finally sold it all away this April as we speak. Now they're having talks here that for WCW and ECW are openly referenced by the commentary team. Yeah, by the commentary team that Benoit was referred to as the former WCW champion who never lost the title, and with other things addressed with Paul Heyman, with mentioning ECW during commentary as well. With other talks, they are thinking of other stuff with any of the big names like Ric Flair, Goldberg, DDP. It came off in a pretty pathetic way as they stated it, as they're thinking of throwing in a storyline with WWF versus WCW because of Shane McMahon was in the last show during the final moments of the WCW show that ended in a shocking twist of events. Again, we don't know the information, and this is going to be before their next pay-per-view soon enough in the end of April, which is also going to be around the time where Shane McMahon jumps off a hard 50-foot drop on Big Show and that entire show of craziness, which goes to show you that this is the time where things are changing. The Rock is going to Hollywood. Things are changing out for the business. Stone Cold is a heel with Triple H. This is crazy. What is going on in the world today? What is happening? This is amazing. It's pretty surprising for what it is. It's, with all due respect, that's pretty crazy. By the way, speaking about crazy, Antonio Inoki says right here, did an interview and claimed that Hulk Hogan had called and talked about doing a Hogan versus Inoki match at the Tokyo Dome. Dave Meltzer says that Inoki has as much credibility as Hogan, which is none, so take this with a huge grain of salt. That being said, Hogan's not doing anything right now. And with WCW shut down, the timing makes sense. But nostalgia acts don't last forever in Japan, as guys like Terry Funk, Mascaras, Hansen, etc., have proven Hogan doesn't mean nearly as much in Japan now as he did in the 80s. When Hogan worked in Japan back in 1993, during the time in between WWF and WCW, they did strong businesses, but he didn't actually set the world on fire or anything. Dave Meltzer doesn't really see Hogan versus Inoki as a viable Tokyo Dome main event in 2001. So, of course, we're coming to the full year on during that whole trial with Hogan and Russo and what happened in Bash the Beach, so can't say much about that. Can't. We also have other interesting characters where Benny McCreary, better known as half of the McGuire twins, actually passed away at 54 years old. With the McGuire twins coming to an end, and the other who actually passed away in 1979, and so on, with Benny and his brother Billy as well. With the world's fastest twins of all time, we also have an 89-year-old legend known as the 70s referee Johnny Red Shoes Duggan, who passed away a week ago, where Dave Meltzer recaps his career in his famous matches of New Japan Wrestling, and even talking about his stuff in various biggest wrestling in the Mexican wrestlers of the 1950s, when he was 86 years old, just some years ago. With those guys being gone, Dustin Rhodes announced plans to do a pay-per-view for his Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling promotion in Florida, and talks about joining the NWA and running shows using himself versus Flair as the headline attraction. I guess it kind of makes sense after their crazy great last pay-per-view and Greed in March during the last pay-per-view in WCW, so I really can't say much about that, but again, and Ric Flair would not come into the company of WWE until maybe the end of the year when around November, I think it was, or October, he joined back the company, which was crazy. Crazy. In other news, with everything going on, for the first time since it started doing these rewinds, there is no WCW section with the drivers of home that drives home the reality of the situation. All WCW related news is now listed under the WWF section, which is just surreal. With all that being said, the real talks was mostly what happened. This is a little bit interesting. As promised in a memo sent out last week ago by Brad Siegel. Who the heck is Brad Siegel? When Eric Bischoff says who Brad Siegel is, Vince Russo says who Brad Siegel is. The whole world, we're still trying to know everyone about who WCW and believe who killed WCW, was intentional. Again, I'm still trying to find out. It's ridiculous. But again, so he sent out a memo that all WCW officials and staff got together on March the 28th for a big staff meeting in the power plant, the power plant, and that's now run by WWE. It's now in the bloodbath, which the death of WCW was made official when approximately 140 employees were informed that they were being let go and told to clear out their offices by the end of the day. They turn in their cell phones, pagers, company credit cards, and the other Time Warner properties when they return to their offices. Their computers were already been shut down and offices were locked and had been changed, with security guards watching over them as everyone boxed up their belongings and everyone was checked on the way out to make sure nothing was being stolen. Yeah, this was pretty crazy back then. It's just shocking. And by the way, we're just about a month or so on till May when all the crazy stuff would happen with the invasion thing. So we're getting to that moment as well. Crazy. Anyway, with all this being said and everything else going on with contracts for WCW wrestlers whose contracts were not picked for the WWF, have been told that appearing on any other wrestling shows will be considered a breach of contract with Time Warner. That right there is a little bit interesting. And just to let you guys know, just to let your viewers know, the XFL Football League in 2001, which was run at the time of Vince McMahon at the time, was still on a top tipsy-turvy because the XFL was still a thing at the time during the start and after the kickoff game starts and everything else at the time. Because just to let you guys know, the season started on February the 3rd, someday after the Super Bowl, less than 1 week following the Super Bowl, and everything else was coming to an end. And just to let you guys know, the standings and the schedule and the games after 10 weeks were over. The championship game would come until April the 21st. So the whole tournament was outdone at the time. The rating systems were down the toilet, but they let the tournament go. And as the whole show for the Bernard Hopkins and the whole middleweight championship tournament was starting at the time is when they were doing the semifinals of San Francisco versus Orlando, Chicago versus Los Angeles in the semifinals on April the 14th and April the 15th. The $1 million game would start on April the 21st in the Memorial Coliseum, the same game and stadium where Los Angeles is taking on Chicago. So with all that being said, you have to say to yourself, Vince McMahon should have saved all of that money by booking multiple WCW and ECW wrestlers into the WWF at the time. It just makes you wonder why you would even think about that. And I'm sure Vince McMahon didn't know that both of the companies were going to die at the time, even though he was building up the XFL since 99. So you can't really say it was his fault that he didn't know that the companies were all going to die months apart like that. No one knew that. It's ridiculous. But again, Vince McMahon would have saved all of that money for the financials that he wasted on the entirety to bring up all of these wrestlers in the company. Except maybe not Sting or New Jack. And by the way, there's a story that New Jack went to the WWF at the time, and once he talked to Vince McMahon and did something crazy or said something that Vince didn't like, he knew he didn't want anything with New Jack, so he fired him even when he was only there for maybe a couple days. And even though Jim Cornette did say in the Dark Side of the Ring that New Jack would have never made to the WWF because no one was going to touch him, again, he did. But Vince McMahon saw the red flag and fired him. As for Sting, he just went on to find another promotion from World Wrestling All-Star until 2003 and worked with TNA, and well, the rest is history by the end of 2014. So, yeah, what else can you say by that? Crazy. Also, by the way, in more news of going on here, Brock Lesnar has also appeared on The Observer for live shows, talking about his background and getting into the WWF when he first approached the Jared Briscoe and Jim Ross during his junior year in the college and started getting offers from WCW and New Japan Wrestling. That is a little bit crazy to talk about. Tryouts for the WCW wrestlers of David Taylor, former wrestler of ECW, Red Dog, interesting, and Shawn Michaels, trainer of Michael Shane, were all tryouts were at the latest TV tapings. The final paragraph says here that Jim Ross posted his Ross Report column on the WWF.com and talked about plans for WCW as he said they will be putting together a team of agents and referees and the ring crew, announcers, etc., etc., etc. in the next week, a few weeks. We also said that WWF and WCW will be cut separate with very little crossover. As he said, interpromotional angle will happen, but probably not until 2002 because they have to rebuild WCW first. They have to rebuild WCW first, you have to say, huh? Well, it's your show. What you gonna do? Anyway, let's just get that over with. Anyway, with all that being said, what about the last news for MMA? What's been going around with UFC in 2001? Well, here's what's been going on in the UFC in 2001. UFC in 2001 has been on a declining of problems. No one wants to book this damn show. No one gives a damn about nothing. The Zuffa link of all of the tournaments, everything else is down the toilet. Nothing is mattered forever. But on last February, UFC marked a major turning point at the time where it would be the first time that UFC would be held by the new owner of Zuffa LLC, which would be headed by Station Casino's owner Frank and Lorenzo Fertitta. They also got the manager by the one and only Dana White, who would actually acquire the UFC in 2001, and after 25 years, he still has the promotion in his hands. And that right there is crazy. So They managed to buy it off because in UFC 29, Defense of the Belts, which was held on December with 1,400 people, and Tito Ortiz defeating Yuki Kondo and Pat Millett defeating Kenji Yamamoto, both championship bouts, and both Japanese failed utterly by horrible submissions. But you can't say that a Japanese guy still actually had a heavyweight title fight in the MMA. Maybe not in boxing, but title nonetheless. Well, light heavyweight title, but still. But anyway, around the time they already had the parent company of SEG, were nearing bankruptcy at the time when they sold it off and everything for UFC owners. Luckily, they got it in January because of this, and now they got the new event, a new promoters here in town, and their next tournament will be in May the 4th, known as Locked and Loaded in Atlantic City, New Jersey, which will be their next show. With Randy Couture as heavyweight champion, will defend his belt against Pedro Rizzo, and Pat Miletich will defend his welterweight title again against Carlos Newton. So we'll get the updates on to understand that. But with all that being said, what about Pride? Well, what about Pride? What do you have to say about Pride? Pride is on the top of the world. The thing about Pride is that the years of what it's been in the world is pretty interesting. Because with all this being said, Pride does bring in a lot of interesting moments. So in Japan, Pride has already been putting out a lot of interesting things in 2001. Whether if you're listening to it or not, that depends. So at the time in 2001, mostly they have had some good events at the time. Just recently in March, last month ago, they've already done the collision course of Saitama, Japan, which did had Waldiri Silva scoring an unbelievable quick fight due to knees and soccer kicks against Kazushi Sakuraba, which was a pretty damn good fight for what it was. And with Guy Mezger, also a former good champ in UFC, and Dan Henderson and Mark Coleman were also part of the show, winning the fights like nothing before, with Japanese fighters having problem winning fights on the show. With all that being said, nothing came of it as much. But considering that being said, the championships of Pride are trying to get stuff ready to go as Pride 17 are getting ready for a couple championships, as Waldemir Silva will take on Kazushi Sakuraba, and also for a middleweight title, and Heath Herring from America, who is also a Texas guy, is going to fight against a pretty much of a dangerous Brazilian fighter named Antonio Rodrigo. So, all in all, nothing much could be said about what's happening in Pride, but there's not a lot of information to find out. So, but yeah, that's about it. Okay, so with all that being said, let's get down to business. Bernard Hopkins versus Keith Holmes. Championship fights against each other. What do we have in store for the world of boxing? Well, with all this being said, guys, we have liftoff. Talks and crazy stuff. I can't find a lot of information for all of the fights or information-wise, and I'm already ignoring the commentary. I'm going to take my time reviewing this one, and probably next month I'll review the next show for William Joppy. Versus William Joppy versus what was his name? Felix Trinidad. So we're gonna get through that as best we could. But we'll review the championship show in September, which will be a specialty because of 9/11. So we're just going to take my time to get through with this one as time goes on. So, what has been going on right now? Nothing much. We've had talks for the world of boxing, and surprisingly, this is what we got in store for everyone here. So, New York City, April the 14th, 2001, live with the New York State Athletic Commission. Have not verified any of it on BoxRec, which shows the question mark, with Peyton Scher as the matchmaker, but promoter Don King in the building. So with all that being said, this is an interesting show. And I will say, though, when looking up the names of these fighters and everything else, this one does give me an interesting look back on understanding what these boxers were. How good were they? And with all that being said, if I had to look up Jerson Ravello versus Manu Ntoh, technically there is some boxing fights of these fighters, but to be honest, there's not really fight footage of this fight. Well, a lot of it's Manu, but not a lot of Jerson. But the information goes that Jerson defeated Manu, who was born in Cameroon, suffered his defeat in a 4-round fight when Jerson Ravello won his 4th pro fight, knocking down the Cameroon fighter in round 1 and round 4, winning the fight easily. Unfortunately, Jerson's career would not last very long against fighters like Alan Green, Andre Ward, and even Maxim Vlaslov, which those are some dangerous fighters back in the day. So, yeah, it was tough. But with all that being said, we do have the future heavyweight champion of the world who would have a lot of highlights and a lot of defeats in his career. 13-0, Sairia Ljakovic versus Cedric Fields. So, technically, with all this being said, this one, again, if I look up Cedric's name, as I'm doing it right now, technically, I can't. Again, there's a lot of footage of both of these guys, but again, it doesn't really show their names. Great. But again, Sairia Ljakovic won the fight by going through 8 rounds. He barely managed to win the fight against Cedric Fields, who was a 14-12 fighter at the time. Cedric Fields was docked 2 points for taken away when he charged Sairia after the bell had sounded in the end of round 4. Those 2-point abduction actually helped Ljakovic to win the fight in 8 rounds, with scorecards reading it 77-74. The other 2 judges had it 76-74, meaning that without those 2-point abductions, those 2 judges would have had 76 even, making the fight a draw. So, yeah. The next fight was known as Jaffa Balogu versus Shannon Miller, which ended in a round 2 TKO victory to seal the deal. And of course, the last fight on the start before we get to the title matches are, well, most with all due to respect here, the match is called Brian Adams versus Calvin Davis. Like, technically, again, do we know these guys? Calvin Davis. It's like if I had to say anything about this, like, I wouldn't really say that there's much to it, because with all that being said, Calvin Davis, I have heard of him before, which I do remember. There was actually a talk about him I once talked about on one of the shows back in the day he fought, but again, I don't know which one of these jobber fights he was doing, but yeah, I do remember about the Bryan fight still. Yeah, I didn't know that was the same night. But again, the guy became a bust just because he just lost against a guy he should have beaten. So, yeah, again, that's ridiculous. And again, if I have to look it up, again, there's no fight footage of the fight whatsoever. Nelson Diapa versus Andy Tabanaz. Well, I will say this though about this because I think with this prospectively, in my opinion, I do have to say this though about the entirety of this one, because I wouldn't really say there's much to it about this fight other than it was mostly in a work of understanding of fiction here. But again, I don't know what to say about this fight. So this fight is for the this fight is for the WBO World Light Flyweight Championship belt. And by the way, I don't even know if this was on HBO or Showtime Boxing because I was only looking this up about the records on BoxRec. But again, I don't know if this was on Showtime or HBO, just in case if it was. But again, what we do know that there is, I think there is like fight footage of which is, I haven't actually seen the fight footage of this fight yet, which is probably for the best because I wanted to talk about the Hopkins fight. But all I have to say is this fight is on Boxing Fight 2016, shows the record. The footage is by YouTuber ZPQMVT space DFSDF. No capitals. That's the YouTuber's name, and the footage is not that good, even though this was released on January the 12th, 2017. Again, this was again for the WBO title, and again, both fighters went on to each other like never before to handle some great performances against each other. Again, the WBO belt might have not been that much talked about at the time. This was for the vacant belt. Information-wise, we're both top-notch because consider this was a light heavyweight title or a light flyweight title, which is the second lowest weight class ever, and this is on TV. It's pretty surprising. But again, Nelson Diapa from born and living in Puerto Rico with Andy from the Philippines. Both guys went on to this fight like never before. The scorecards had some closeness for each of the fighters. It said that after 10 rounds of boxing, the judging scores were so shocking. William Hutt gave the score 95 even. Melvina Latham had it 98-92. And Chick Hill had it 97-93. Those two judges favored the fight for Andy. So what happened in the 11th round? Well, I might as well look at the 11th round on footage and see what we have in store because I don't know much about the information, but I didn't really want to talk about this fight because I only wanted to talk about the middleweight title fight is why I'm here. So it's curious to see about this fight and see what happened here. But again, with all this being said, it's going to be interesting because mostly it seems like both of these guys were doing good. So Diapa is wearing red and white, and so he's the winner of the fight. Andy is wearing blue. Again, both guys are steadying up, leading off the left foot, so they are orthodox fighters. And again, Andy pushes him to the ropes. They're starting to throw multiple punches at each other. We get a left uppercut, misses. A horrible uppercut. Both of them are clinging heads to each other, going down. We're getting clinches and holds. Interesting. Wow. With 45 seconds into the round, they're throwing huge Deontay Wilder punches at each other, which is crazy that this is the last 2 rounds of the fight. So you can tell that these guys are going for a knockout, or maybe Nelson is doing it because Nelson knows he's not winning the fight. They're both grabbing clinches on each other, putting holds, pushing to the rope. Diapa's getting the worst of it. And then with all that being said, they are coming halfway through with 1 minute and 30 seconds left of this round. And then suddenly, Andy grabs his arm. The referee gives warning. And before you know it, with only 1 minute left of the round, Andy is still on the offensive, but while Nelson is defending himself by throwing jabs here or there. And then with 55 seconds left of the fight, they're now going straight to the middle of the ring. Get a punch, jab, and then before you know it, 45 seconds later of the fight, ooh! Let me look at that again. Okay, I don't know what punch that was. Okay, so the fight ends. Okay, so Nelson throws a left jab. Andy throws an uppercut. And then, so Andy throws an uppercut when he dodged the jab. Oh! So as Andy is going for the right uppercut, Nelson is throwing a jab in the middle of it while he's doing the uppercut. Dude, that's a crazy knockout. Ooh. And then Nelson puts in his right punch. Oh, that one. Oh, that right punch got him. Oh, and his knee. Oh, he fell to his knees. He almost would have broken. Oh, and the referee doesn't even count. The referee counts to 3 and ends the fight by it. Oh, he knew that Andy was knocked out. Wow. What a winning finale. Andy from the Philippines was winning the fight by 2 judges. He only needed to make it through these last rounds with 1 minute left of the fight, or 45 or 30 seconds left. And Nelson wins it by an upset victory, by a KO victory. Wow, that's crazy. Wow. I'll be honest, though, that's actually pretty dangerous for what it was. Okay, wow. I wasn't interested on reviewing this fight. I only cared about the Bernard Hopkins fight, as said before. But you know what? I'm actually glad I actually watched that fight. You know what? Good job for Arthur McCanty Jr., which, fun fact, his father was also a referee in his late 80s or 90s at the time. Like, it's crazy that Arthur McCanty Jr. Man, Arthur McCanty Jr. seemed young back then when refereeing that fight. And his father, Senior, would actually ref his last fight in September against the greatest Mexican fighter in the minimum weight, which we'll get to that one in a couple months because that's going to be a doozy. But again, that's pretty surprising. That's pretty surprising for what it was. So yeah, with that being said, that's pretty great. Okay, so it's time to get into it. This is the main event. Bernard Hopkins versus Keith Holmes. All world championship titles, all on the line for it. IBF champion Hopkins versus WBC champion Holmes. With all this being said, they are marking this as the unification tournament. Hopkins is entering in the fight as the IBF, as the tournament for IBF champion, and Holmes as well as WBC. So with the New York reported, everything is being here for the competition. But again, nothing could be said less about this fight. Okay, so here's the thing. At this time, William Joppy, Keith Holmes, and Felix Trinidad were in their young years. They were in their 30s, some in their 20s barely. Bernard Hopkins was 36 years old. He was the oldest guy. He was in his mid-30s. He boxed for over a decade at this time, and no one would expect him to fight for another 15 years or even do much. So, and considering Keith Holmes was a southpaw fighter, people could still believe that maybe as for Bernard Hopkins as an orthodox, he could actually come out of nowhere and win this fight. And that's what happened. So there's talks about anything else about this fight. I'll be honest though, this fight was just utter dominance. Both guys went in there, and mostly one guy was winning the fight without not even giving his opponent a breath of fresh air. That's what this entire fight was. And I'm actually going to ignore this fight because there wasn't a lot of pizzazz in this fight. There wasn't a lot of stuff going on because the only person dominating the fight was Bernard Hopkins. Like, okay, I'll be honest though. The first round of the fight seemed pretty good. It seemed like it was a great fight. It was a great starter. Again, orthodox versus southpaw. Keith in white trunks, black trunks for Bernard. Keith is leading off the right foot, right glove, that's southpaw. Left glove, left foot for Hopkins, orthodox. And the first round of the fight starts off cleanly. There was a moment in the second round where he goes for great punches, and sometimes Keith Holmes sometimes goes under and just goes like this. He does some Rocky Marciano movement sometimes. Sometimes it works, and then he goes for jabs, and Hopkins, he gets pushed back. So the first couple rounds were pretty of a tough situation for Hopkins, which I could say for the least of his worries. But he managed to handle himself until the third round, until Holmes lost his balance in the fight. Managed to circulate some rounds here or there by the midpoint. But Hopkins started to find his way, the groove, everything he found was on it. And for the next couple rounds, he was finding the marks. He found the jabs, the opportunities to finally win the fight easily. And then come into round 5 is when the most controversy thing would come into the tournament. Hopkins goes forward 45 seconds into the fight. Some grabs, some this or that, punches. And there's some guys, they're both bumping their heads against each other, blocking. Holmes is trying to get to some jabs, clinches, grabs, and holds. And by the way, the referee's name, what's the referee's name? Steve Smoger. There are pushes, other stuff going on. And then with only 1 minute left of the 5th round, Hopkins is pushing him forward, pushing him out, and he's the one that's pushing him forward and so on. And as he does it, Hopkins goes straight in and punches Keith right in the groin. And Steve, and by the way, there were other times in the fight that Steve Kroger, I think, gave warning about some low punches here or there. So he did not hesitate. He tells him to go back and docks Holmes for 1 point because of it. They continue the fight with Holmes managing to throw a couple jabs under. And again, but it wasn't good enough. So if I had to say whether or not I would give a round to Keith on that, I would. Like, yes, I would say round 1 was a good round for him. And even though round 5 was a 9-9 score, so I decided to give Steve the benefit for his point abduction and giving Holmes for that. So I decided to give Keith Holmes a 10-8 score for round 5, just for generosity. And by the way, one of the 3 judges, by the way, that goes by the name of Larry Hazard Jr., he scored that round a 10-8 as well. And Tom Kazmarek and George Colin gave it 9-9. So, yeah, so let that be a lesson. But again, after the end of the 6th round, where there are multiple jabs, punches, and bodies and grabs, and with 1 minute and 10 seconds left of the fight, Keith took a knee for that from getting outboxed, and then seconds later, he's getting grabbed, hold. again, it's not that seemingly easy for him. And by the way, wait, just to let you guys know, Harold Lederman, after 6 rounds, Harold Lederman already gave out the scores of 59-54, all rounds for Hopkins, and the 9-9 score in the 5th round. So I couldn't say it was that legit for all rounds for Hopkins, but, and again, he gave all the other 6 rounds to Hopkins as well. He went in there, found the mark, and again, I'm not going to talk about the second half as much, but again, there was a lot of grabs, holds, and again, in a 12-round fight, you can't say much about it. There are times that they were throwing out heavy-duty punches, but some of the crowd, the fans liked it, but when you look at it, Hopkins' body movement was just out of this world, and Keith Holmes could not find the movement. He tries to take him to the ropes and gets punched. Every time he tries to go for a jab, Hopkins goes for a hook, or even sometimes a cross. It's just that hard. He could not find the opportunity. Every time he tries to push Hopkins to the rope like he did in round 10, Hopkins just still punches either way. He just had nothing to show for. Like, Keith had no idea what he was getting himself into. And he even lost his balance at 20 seconds in the 11th round when he was going forward. He throws out a left, he throws out a right, and then Hopkins sets off a left right into his equilibrium, and then he loses out his balance for a second, which backs him up. And Hopkins starts throwing back wild punches at him, and they both rubbing their heads back and forth. And as in the middle of it, there was one moment where their heads were rubbed back and forth a second later, and Hopkins throws a perfect punch, and a bunch of spit comes out of Keith's mouth or something, or whoever's spit came out, which was pretty crazy when you look back at it. Again, I will say, though, good job for Keith for staying in the fight. And even though Hopkins at this time might have not been in the knockout situation, he did amazing. Like the championship rounds, the fans were expecting a knockout. And by the way, like I said before, Keith Holmes is wearing white trunks. So the back side of his trunks were covered with sweat. So you can almost assume that he pissed himself, which is kind of funny. And with 50 seconds left of the fight, they both even collide or even get stuck and tangled up. And I think Hopkins fell to the canvas on the grab and clinch. Again, it's crazy. And then the 12th and final round comes in. They're both going forward as best they could. Hopkins knows what he's doing. So he loses his balance 26 seconds into the 12th round. He throws out a left. He throws out a right into his groin, ends it with a left, and the referee, Steve, warns Bernard not to do it again. And Keith takes a knee. So you got to say to yourself, was this a pretty good fight? No, it wasn't. Yes, Hopkins won the fight legit, but when you look back at those groin punches and those other moments of dirtiness, this fight was pretty hard for me to watch. And I couldn't write none of the stuff down because this was a dirty fight. It was entertaining, but again, it was crazy. And again, seeing Keith Holmes in his white trunks being covered with whatever, if he did had a water break or something in the fight, good job for him for surviving the round during the last minute of him getting grabbed, hit, equilibrium shots, everything, and he's still pushing Bernard to the corner as best he could. Again, there was a lot of cheating moments, and with everything going on, I don't even know why the referee didn't dock Bernard a point for the clinching, the grabbing, and everything else going on from the punches. The bell rings. Keith just raises his hand just for the fun of it. Bernard's dancing, and that's about it. And that's the end of the fight. They show replays of low blows going on, and I wasn't even caring about the announcers talking. And again, after realizing it, oh yeah, and by the way, this is HBO, so Jim Lampley and other people were there, but I didn't really care about the commentators. I'm going to save that for the last show for September. But here's my final thoughts about this. Bernard Hopkins put in a lot of effort into this fight. Even though I scored this fight a 110 to 116 in favor of Hopkins, the other judges had it 118 to 109, 119 to 108, fair enough, and 117 to 110. While Harold Lederman, well, I would have to say his score is a lot better than mine. 109 to 99 after the 11th round. So yeah, he might have had it 119 to 108. So yeah, I really can't say it. Like, again, there might have been a couple times you could say he might have won a couple rounds, but yeah, some judges were being generous to him, and that's what I can say. But it just wasn't enough. By the way, before we end this episode, here's the last report on the BoxRec media that stated, New York Times reported, Hopkins controlled Saturday's fight for the third round, winning easily all three judges' scorecards. There were no knockouts, but Hopkins detected the action of sustaining body attack and rattled Holmes several times with punches in the head. The biggest problem for Hopkins on Saturday was avoiding hitting Holmes with low blows. Hopkins complained before the fight that Holmes wore his trunks too high, and his concern about his being penalized for low blows proved to be valid. With 48 seconds left in the fifth round, a point was taken away from Hopkins for a low blow, and on two other occasions, timeouts were given to Holmes after he complained of low blows. In Hopkins' mind, Holmes wearing his trunks high made it difficult to avoid hitting him below the belt. The guy had turtleneck trunks on, which were white with piss stains all over them. He might have had his water broken, Hopkins said, which is why his performance was never that good. If a man brings a turtleneck in to the ring, what are you going to do? Maybe one or two of those blows were low, but they weren't intentional. I couldn't let it bother my game plan. End quote. So, yeah, so after I read that article and such, I did look back at the footage, and I did realize that there were moments that a turtleneck trunk were there. So I did actually saw something that was worn by Holmes, and I didn't pay attention to the fight as much. But yeah, looking at it and how his trunks were too high, I couldn't really say that might have affected the fight. Yeah, you can almost tell maybe those punches. It just goes to show you that it's hard for people to understand how high you have to wear the trunks, similar like Alexander Usyk's situation with the Dubois fight. But again, I can't put that into conception there. But again, I'm not going to argue over that. I just can't. But yeah, with all that being said, thank you viewers for watching this episode. Next time, or next month, we are going to review the month of May, May the 12th, 2001, the second fight for the middleweight tournament of Felix Trinidad versus William Joppy for the WBA and maybe the lineal-weight championship belt. And maybe the Ring Magazine belt, if they ever bring it back. They haven't brought it back during the end of December the 31st, 1999, so we better watch out for that. But still, those titles will be on the line for the heck of it. Considering with Trinidad, will Trinidad actually prove himself after his light middleweight title fight? Will William Joppy prove to himself that those defeats he had recently in his career were flukes? Well, one of his defeats, we'll just have to wait and see. With that being said, thank you for watching this episode, and we'll see you next time.